exorcism has captivated and horrified the American public for decades. We grapple with our primal fear of dark forces from the great beyond through books, movies, and television programs. But sometimes, the real-life events that have inspired these horror stories are far more terrifying than anything humans could conceive. Today on Scream to Screen, we'll uncover the violent truth about the death of Anmeliese Michel and the 67 exorcisms she endured, which inspired the exorcism of Emily Rose. But before we get started, now's a great time to subscribe to Graveyard Shift. Leave a comment if you're brave enough, and let us know what strange phenomenon or person you'd like us to cover next. And with that, let's dive in. Anmeliese Michel was born on September 21, 1952, to a fairly normal Bavarian family in West Germany. The Michels were devoutly Catholic, but that wasn't all that surprising considering 70% of the almost 11 million residents were Catholic at the time. Anmelise's family was religious, yes, but they were more than that. They were true believers, living by a strict religious code. Anmeliese and her three sisters were forced to go to Catholic Mass twice a week. Her mother, in particular, pushed the girls to pray and devote as much time as possible to religious devotion. In many ways, Anmelise's childhood was taken from her. Because of her devout Catholic upbringing, she was denied so many of the experiences normal kids have. According to the doctors Anmeliese met with later, she developed neuroses related to religious iconography as a result of punishments that were inflicted upon her as a young girl. Remember this diagnosis because it will come into play later. As religiously oppressive as the Michel house was, Anmelise's friends said she was a great student, showed strength in language study, and was publicly happy and playful. In her private life, though, Anmeliese carried a darkness inside her, a festering wound poisoned by the religious torment she was suffering. The emotional ramifications of the Michel family dynamic would come back to haunt them all for years. Whether it was demonic possession or mental illness, Anmelise's condition progressed gradually and worsened incrementally over a period of years. While at school one day in 1968, a then 16-year-old Anmeliese unexpectedly blacked out for a few minutes. During this first documented blackout, her classmates said she fell into a trance-like state. Anmeliese,
the choice is yours.
Anmeliese said she didn't remember the event and claimed she was fine after the episode. But that same night, she woke up suddenly, feeling a presence pressing heavily down on her body, and then wet her bed. Fearing there might be something seriously wrong with their daughter, Anmelise's parents kept her home the following day, but there were no further incidents. It seemed like it was a one-off occurrence. Anmeliese said she felt fine, and she was, until August 1968, when Anmeliese experienced a similar episode and was taken to a local hospital for examination and observation. Her primary care physician, Dr. Vogt, referred her to a neurologist, Dr. Siegfried Lüthi. After an examination and a series of tests, Dr. Lüthi found nothing wrong with her brain function. Physically, Anmeliese seemed completely healthy. But in February of 1970, Anmeliese experienced a third event. After catching tuberculosis and spending months in a hospital, Anmeliese suffered yet another blackout and another bedwetting episode. She became the laughingstock of the hospital ward she was staying in. The other patients mocked her for wetting the bed and blacking out. No one wanted to have anything to do with her. But that wasn't the worst of it. This third blackout was different from the others. After coming to, Anmeliese reported seeing colors, hearing sounds, and feeling euphoric while praying with her rosary beads. She underwent more tests with a second neurologist, a Dr. von Haller, who diagnosed her with epilepsy and prescribed her medication. And that's when things went from bad to worse. Anmeliese eventually returned to school later in 1970, but now she was a completely different person. Her friends said she was depressed and withdrawn and seemed to have a darkness about her. People started to talk about her behind her back. What caused this change in personality? Was it the shame of repeated blackouts and bedwetting episodes? Was it being ostracized and ridiculed while staying at the hospital? No, it was her seizures, which began occurring with increasing frequency. Her doctors were unable to offer any insight into the root cause of her seizures, which only compounded her family's frustration with the situation. Anmeliese pressed on, though. She turned to religion as a coping mechanism. She threw herself into researching Catholicism while finishing up high school, and in 1973, she enrolled at the University of Würzburg to become a teacher. She continued to take her medication during this time, but her condition steadily declined. By mid-1973, Anmeliese experienced hallucinations while praying and believed she was damned. She became obsessed with the idea that the devil was inside of her. She prayed and prayed and prayed. She would cry herself to sleep at night, clutching her rosary beads. In an effort to rid herself of what she perceived as a demon, Anmeliese would add regular visits to a priest along with her standard doctor visits. By late 1973, Anmelise's strange behavior became completely unpredictable. She was evidently being driven crazy by whatever darkness had taken hold of her. To make things even worse, her erratic and unpredictable symptoms kicked into overdrive. Finally, her parents had to confront her. They informed her that they had no other choice but to pull her out of college. From that point on, she was confined to her bedroom under literal house arrest. It was during this time she started taking Tegretol, an anti-seizure drug and mood stabilizer. Also during this period, Anmeliese reported hearing a strange knocking in her bedroom. Her sisters confirmed that they heard the knocking as well. She also claimed to hear a voice that would regularly damn her to hell. Despite dutifully taking her daily cocktail of neuroleptic medications, Anmelise's symptoms worsened in a terrifying and unexplainable way. She started growling like an animal. She saw demons. She exhibited Hulk-like strength. During one episode, Anmeliese began throwing her sister around the house like a rag doll. At one point, after arguing with her parents, she urinated on the floor, then got down on all fours and lapped it up like a dog. She would regularly chew coal, rip her clothes off, and eat insects she found around the house. She was angry, irrational, and almost completely unreachable by her family members. To make things even more frightening, religious objects like crucifixes and holy water drove her mad. Her mother recalled an incident where she caught Anmeliese staring at a framed portrait of the Virgin Mary, and that her daughter's eyeballs were 100% jet black. The Michel family began to realize they might be seeing the symptoms of what the Catholic Church might consider a demonic possession. Anmelise's family eventually asked several local priests for an exorcism, but the men declined and encouraged the Michels to continue with the traditional medical treatment she was already receiving. Despite what you see in the movies, it isn't that easy to get an exorcism. A Catholic exorcism requires the permission of a bishop, which the Michel family could not seem to arrange. Sometime in 1973, the Michels met Father Ernst Alt, a local priest, who upon meeting Anmeliese almost immediately said she didn't look like an epileptic and claimed she wasn't suffering from seizures. Father Alt was convinced Anmeliese was possessed by demons and was able to get the attention of the local bishop about what was happening to Anmeliese and her family. Archbishop Joseph Strangl eventually granted Father Arnold Rentz permission to exorcise Anmeliese in compliance with the Rituale Romanum of 1614, but with a very important caveat. The exorcism was to be performed in complete secrecy. Father Rentz performed Anmelise's first exorcism, with Father Alt assisting, on September 24, 1975. During the rite, she reportedly began talking about dying to atone for the wayward youth of the day and the apostate priests of the modern church. Eventually, she stopped eating, saying she was no longer allowed to. At this point, Anmelise's parents had given up consulting doctors and cut off her medication. Instead, they put all their faith in the Catholic rites of exorcism, and Anmeliese was subjected to 67 exorcisms in all over an 11-month span during 1975 and 1976. It wasn't unusual for Anmeliese to endure 2 sessions a week, with some exorcism sessions lasting up to 4 hours. In audio recordings from these sessions, one can clearly hear Anmelise's distorted guttural voice. She growls like a wild beast and makes profane utterances in response to the religious ritual. The gruesome audio recordings during her exorcisms also reveal that Fathers Rentz and Alt talked to 6 spirits allegedly possessing Anmeliese. These spirits, or personalities if that's what they were, made up a murderer's row of evil incarnate: Lucifer, Judas Iscariot, Nero, Cain, Hitler, and Valentin Fleischmann, a disgraced Frankish priest from the 16th century. Given Anmelise's history with religion and her obsession with Christian teachings, there were later theories that Anmeliese chose these figures intentionally. It's almost impossible not to agree. Despite being not much more than skin and bones, Anmeliese had to be physically restrained and held down while her exorcisms took place. This abuse, along with a lack of medical treatment and food or water, took a toll on her body. Anmeliese Michel died at her home on July 1st, 1976. Her death certificate stated that Anmeliese ultimately died of malnutrition and dehydration. Her autopsy, however, revealed broken teeth, blackened eyes, and bruises on her hands, arms, and wrists. She also had broken knees and numerous other wounds on her body. Fathers Alt and Rentz, as well as Anmelise's parents, were put on trial for negligent homicide in 1978. During the trial, the priests boldly maintained the exorcisms were successful and had liberated Anmeliese from the demons possessing her. Father Alt even insisted that some of the wounds documented by Anmelise's autopsy were the stigmata, corresponding to the divine wounds suffered by Jesus Christ as a result of his crucifixion. The evidence apparently didn't line up, and the story of Anmelise's alleged demonic possession wasn't enough to sway the German court's three-judge panel. All of the defendants in the case were found guilty, but their sentences varied. Fathers Alt and Rentz were charged with manslaughter and given 6 months in prison with suspended sentences. Anmelise's parents received no punishment at all, as the German legal system deemed that they'd experienced enough suffering. In 2005, a loose film adaptation of this story was produced titled The Exorcism of Emily Rose. The film follows an agnostic lawyer who's tasked with defending a parish priest who's accused of negligent homicide due to an exorcism he carried out. The screenplay for the film was written by Scott Derrickson. Derrickson views himself as a believer. The film is loosely based on the life of Anmeliese Michel. It takes vast creative license with the story. Around the same time, Hans Christian Schid also produced a German adaptation of the story titled Requiem. The German film is a bit more faithful to the real-life events, but it too takes quite a bit of creative license. Requiem tells the story of Michaela, a woman who is struggling to lead a normal life. She's trapped in a limbo which, depending on the viewer's perspective, could be a demonic possession or a form of mental illness. Both versions of these stories hold certain similarities with Anmelise's trials and tribulations, but they also each diverge greatly. Ultimately, the story of Anmeliese Michel is a horrifyingly simple tale. Was she suffering from epilepsy or another undiagnosed physical or psychological condition? Or was Anmeliese Michel, in fact, possessed by 6 demons? In the end, we'll never truly have the answers. All we can say for sure is that Anmeliese endured a horrible tragedy, and the pain and trauma that she and her family endured was very real and has never quite faded away.
All you hear is how to build the flesh. It's a feel-good message. That's what you hear out there. It's all about feel good, do good, all that. Make money, all the rest of it. And I'm sorry to say that prosperity has gone a little crazy. Ask me, sir, are you ready to make it public?
Choice is yours.
Well, not totally. Because I don't want to hurt my friends whom I love. I'm done with it. Did you hear me? I think that hurts the gospel. So I'm making this statement for the first time in my life, and frankly, I don't care what people think about me anymore. So when they invite me to telethons, I think they will not like me anymore. Am I shocking you? Good, let's have a high five on this one. That's about all I will say. And I've been sick for a while too, I just couldn't say it. The gospel is not for sale. And the blessings of God are not for sale, and miracles are not for sale, and prosperity is not for sale.